The Brandenburgs had they had their first store down there at that end of town, and then they came up here and on High Street and built their store. Up on High Street where they had the post office, Francis.
Yeah.
Up on High Street, they had the post office. And of course I'll have to tell you about the post office. In the first place, it was only a second-class office. No money. At a second class is just cancellation. And of course, everybody wanted it, of course, but Miss Brandon, the Johnsons, I'll tell you about the feud. The Johnsons had the post office all the time. They were Republicans. They had all the, but just second class. There weren't any people here, and just cancellation. But of course, when all these people come in now, which Bob had, if it was cancellation, you'd really make money. Because everybody and all this mail coming in, you know, you'd make money. But in those days, there wasn't anybody here. Over 10 or 15 families would stay all winter, you know, nobody here. So Roosevelt, of course, was in for 16 years, you know. And 16 years, ruined the country. But anyway, the Johnsons, of course, were Republicans. And then Mrs. Brandenburg decides that she wanted, they were living at that end, the Brandenburgs were living down there where you go on this road and then the bridge, it's where Wayne Kidd lives now. The Brandenburgs live there. And she decided she wanted the post office. So the battle was on in 34. And it was zipped back and it was zipped there, then it would be zipped back. Miss Johnson's had two sisters. She made them Democrats real quick, you know, so they would get it, you know. So they would get it, you know. And of course, it just didn't work. And I think when it was sitting, in those days, you had to take your test, you had to have the highest grade, you know, and all. But anyway, so that was the history of the post office. So Miss Brandenburg finally got the post office, and it was she had down at that end of town. It's on High Street where you have to stop where that bridge is, and then that first house there, I think Wayne Kidd lives in the house. And they had a post office. They had, there's little groceries in there, and I think they had a liquor license too. But anyway, she had the post office. Then of course, the battle was still going on, you know. And Nellie got the highest grade, so Nellie got it back. So then Miss Brandenburg comes down on High Street just a little ways, and there was a house sitting there on the left, that side of the road. The post office was in there. And of course, one night the post office was dynamited. And the post office, nobody in it, nobody was hurt. The mail was just scattered, not enough, you know, just to scatter the mail. So the post office was dynamited. Of course, Uncle Sam comes in with these greyhounds, you know, but they never did find a clue. So that ended the post office deal. But when it was finally made, when Roosevelt or the government doesn't own the post office now, it's all leased out, you know. But when the department they decided on Mrs. Brandenburg, so she got the post office, and they built that big white building down there on High Street. They had a grocery store and the post office, and their home was all in one building. So she had it there till she put in her 25 years and retired in 61 or 62 and has gone on. So that ended the post office deal. So then she had the post. Then when the post office deal, of course, was up, why, I'm not going to talk about myself. But anyway, the post office deal was up. Of course, they wanted me to have it, but I didn't want it because I had the lodge and I had the bar. In the meantime, my husband had passed on, and I knew I couldn't do it all. So I said, no, I just don't even want. And no money, cancellation. When you sold a 2-cent stamp, you got a penny. You know why? Anyway, so. She had the post office, so when she retired, they come over and wanted me to take it when she retired. Of course, I didn't want it. And then they went over, and John Wagner at El Sombrero, he took it. So John Wagner had the post office for 2 years. And they had to, in order for them to have it, they had to wall off half of their lobby, in the lobby, for the post office. And of course, Nell, his wife, never did like it because it did ruin her lobby, you know. And so they gave it up. So then the post office had it. And then, so then they came, I was the county chairman, so then they came to me and they wanted to, again, you know, it goes through the precinct and on up, you know. And then I said, well, I'll see if Betty will take it. That was my son's wife. So I said to Betty, I said, you've got 2 children, you don't have any money. And I said, that'll bring in a little more income, why don't you take it? So, of course, Betty took it. Of course, Bob was her competitor. Bob Prunty was her competitor. So they went to Raton, and of course, Betty got the post office. She got the post office. But, of course, she only kept it for 2 years, and then she gave it up. So then Bob got the post office. So Bob's had the post office for 25 years, and now he's retired. And, of course, we don't know who the postmaster is going to be. So that's that. Now what else?
When I started to tell you about that, where my grandparents lived, during the Depression, money was hard to come by.
Yes.
The Democrats went into office, and the Republicans were the Johnsons, the T.D. Neal Mercantile had the post office. My mother and dad decided to be nice if they had the post office for continual income, because there was nothing else here at that time. So they got out and went after the post office. Well, it wound up to be a big old fight between this end of town and that end of town.
Oh.
But now, is that what started all this east-west division years ago?
That's probably what started it.
I wondered about that.
That at Bitter Creek.
Now, who had the post office? Since it was at the Johnsons, the
That was
Mercantile.
T.D. Neal
Neal's
Mercantile.
Mercantile. And then they wanted the post office.
They had the post office, and my mother and dad wanted it. So they went after it because there was a new regime in office. The Democrats were in office. The Johnsons were Republicans. We were Democrats. And so my mother was appointed that the post office was to be moved the next day into the building behind Red River Inn, the present Red River Inn, where my granddad and grandmother had lived. That's where they're going to have the temporary office for the post office until my dad could get a building built. They got all the fixtures, moved them in that the day before, and we're going to pick up the papers and documents the next day in the mail. And that night, that building was blown off the face of the earth.
I've heard that before, and you know,
Well, that was my grandparents' building.
they blew their building off of the face of the earth.
Yeah,
He's got a paper clipping of an article out of the Taos paper.
just a
Now,
short
that
blurb
was
on it.
all by accident, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
You know what?
Very, very.
I've got a picture of some of the people we think were involved in it.
Whoa.
So, what, did they ever get the post office put in someplace else?
Yeah, my parents hung in there.
Where J.D. and Renee live.
No.
Wasn't that
No,
where
it's where
the
Wayne
post
Kidd
office-
is, where Wayne Kidd lives now. My mother and dad had a home there and a little store, and then the post office was there.
Oh, but then they did move it eventually to.
Well, the people up here fussed about the post office being that end of town, and they wanted more central locations, so that's when they built the building up there where J.D. lives now.
And that became post office.
That became the post office.
So where J.D. lives now, that became a post office.
That became the post office.
Huh.
And that was
34.
no, about 37, I think, when they built that building.
That's right.
We were down at that end of town for a while.
So they wanted it more centrally located. But they had already moved the fixtures and everything to your grandma's house.
Yeah, in those days, the postmaster had to furnish his own fixtures. The
Oh.
government didn't furnish them.
Uh-huh.
So, the materials and the furniture and equipment that was in that building were the private property of my mother and dad. When it was blown off the face of the earth, it belonged to them, so there was no federal investigation in those days. This was before alcohol farms investigations.
Greta Gallagher told me that story, and she says she knows who did it. She wants to say.
We know who did it too.
Got a good idea the same day, didn't you?
Pretty
You not only
good.
have the Republican into town and the Democratic into town, you also have a post office.
Now, the fixtures that Bob Prunty has in his building now,
Those are his.
those are his? Those didn't come from your folks' post office?
You know what? The window, I think the window did.
Okay.
Chris?
Because see, when John Wagner took it, he took part of your folks' boxes, and then he had it a year, and then Annie Beth took it, and so some of those.
When she and Tony split and Bob Prunty took over the post office.
That's right.
I think the window in where Bob Prunty's building is the original window my mother bought new.
Okay.
You talking about the window that you used to get
service
your
window.
mail?
Yeah, the service window.
You bought your
Read by
little
Stan.
stamps and stuff.
But the boxes aren't.
I don't think so. I think the boxer, I think Bob bought those someplace else.
Okay.
Some of them might be some of the old original ones.
I think there are some of them. But he had to add to it because there were so many more people wanting boxes, you
Yeah.
know, that he bought new boxes, but I still think some of the boxes were your mom's from her office.
You all know that there was 2 post offices in Red River at one time? Yeah, W.A. Johnson and Horace Johnson.
Now, I've heard a lot of stories about those 2 post offices. How did they come to be, 2 post offices? I've been trying to get that story straight for about 4 years now. And,
You get it straight, tell me.
okay. I haven't been...
I've heard a lot of stories about it too.
Okay.
At one time, there was fellows talking about Upper Red River and Lower Red River. On that side of Bitter Creek was Upper Red River, on this side of Bitter Creek was Lower Red River. And I've asked all the old timers, how come they named this town Red River? He said, well, because in flood times, people were in battle all the time over Bitter Creek, pushing it one way or another, so there was little bloodshed, so they called it Red River. What happened to the post office in the north of town, I could name somebody that might have done it. Well, once one night it got blown up with a little dynamite, so that ended that post office.
Don't give anybody any ideas.
You better watch yours over there.
Johnny, do you know who blew it up?
Well, no, I won't say
When there's a story about, that there was no tracks, they thought they had put sacks, burlap sacks around the creek and had pepper in it or something to keep the dogs from tracking or something. Have you ever heard, Tilly used to tell me that.
Probably did one.
Look, he's not telling, I knew it.